After traveling for 10 hours, we arrived at Lourdes at 9 p.m. We retired to our hotel, feeling tired and crumpled after such a long bus trip. The next morning, we were up early. A biting wind was blowing as we started out for the sanctuary of Lourdes. As we crossed the bridge across the river Gave, I noticed a family of ducks taking an early morning swim. We were all wrapped up in our coats and jackets, but I had no cap and I felt my ears were ready to fall off. Crowds were already at Lourdes as we entered the sanctuary. The Rosary Basilica stood before us, its dome and gold cross shining bright in the morning sun. Across the Rosary Square, the crowned Virgin stood facing the church and bid us welcome. We climbed up to the second level to the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. We could see the crowds below at the grotto. And at the taps of the waters of Lourdes. The river Gave ran alongside the grotto. We gathered at one of the side chapels, the chapel of St. Michael, where our three priests celebrated the Holy Eucharist. After the Mass, I went down to the grotto for a moment of prayer and reflection. The line of pilgrims was long. Then I went to the taps to drink the water and wash my face, as the Virgin bid Bernadette do. I filled my plastic container. After watching a short film at the tourist center, we walked back to the hotel for lunch. We encountered a strange sight, a group of American Indians playing music on the street. 5 of us returned at 2 p.m. for a guided tour of Lourdes. We were blessed that day, for our guide was not available. Instead, a feisty Irish priest, Father Brian, volunteered to guide us. For the next 2 hours, he regaled us with inspiring and amusing stories of Bernadette and the apparitions, as no other guide can. It turned out that he was the chaplain of Lourdes and an author of several books as well. He took us first to the underground Basilica of St. Pius X, which was still dark and empty. It had an altar in the middle and can accommodate 25,000 people. We proceeded to the small Lourdes Museum, where Father Brian showed us a tableau of what the place looked like in the time of Bernadette. Her family lived in the town of Lourdes, which was a mile away from an unpleasant place called Masabielle, where there was a grotto. She and a sister were sent off to gather firewood, and so they came here, where she saw a girl in light.
Then the vision made the sign of the cross, and Bernadette made the sign of the cross. She said her rosary, and the vision fingered her beads. She didn't say the Hail Mary, she didn't know it was Our Lady, but she bowed her head always at the Glory Be. That's the first one. There's prayer is part of the message of Lourdes. Right through there's always prayer. Okay? Okay. When you go down there, you know the statue in the grotto, it's 6 foot. Bernadette never liked that statue. Because Bernadette was 4'6". Do you meters or do you feet?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
4 foot 6, you understand.
right.
Bernadette was 14 years old when Bernadette, she called her into the grotto. When Bernadette went in, she saw somebody who was smaller than her, first thing. Secondly, she was 16, about 16 years of age. Someone the same size as Bernadette. She saw a girl. So Bernadette wasn't frightened. And she was slightly smaller. She wasn't looking up. And she's with her here. She smiled at Bernadette. Then she says to Bernadette, would you do me the favor of coming here for 2 weeks? Now notice what she said. Remember, Bernadette, they're the poorest in Lourdes. They're of no importance. Father has accused her of stealing. She's in bad health. She can't read or write. She's a nobody. But the lady says, would you do me the pleasure, the kindness of coming here? I would be indebted to you. Bernadette said, she spoke to me as one person speaks to another. She didn't click her hand and say, you come here for 2 weeks. You know, this is, and that's treating people as people. That's big message. On that. She didn't speak to her in English or Spanish. She spoke to me in, it was in a local dialect, which the big people wouldn't have used. Because they said to her afterwards, did she speak to you in Latin? No, what's Latin? Did she speak to you in French? I don't know French, she said. What did she speak to you? She said in the dialect. And she was told she can't be from God because God wouldn't speak that language. And Bernadette said, how do you know? So it's Bernadette. She said, I don't promise to make you happy in this world, but in the other. Brilliant. Correct. Not in the next. People say the next. The other world is God's. I'll put it this way. When this world's values is that if you're like a model, a film star, become famous, lots of money, importance, good looks like me, plenty of hair, etc. That's this world's value. God's value is when we're all one family, when the unimportant are important, where all of that kind of thing, where we share. So the priest had said, get her name, get her name, get her name. 4 times she asked the lady when she appeared, what's your name, what's your name, what's your name? And then she said, I am the Immaculate Conception. But Bernadette ran, she just kept on repeating, I am the Immaculate, I am the Immaculate, I am the Immaculate Conception, so she wouldn't forget it.
So she wouldn't forget, yes.
And she went up to the priest's house, she didn't knock, she went straight in the door, and she met him and she says, I am the Immaculate Conception. And he says, what do you say? You little brat, like I am the Immaculate Conception. She says, but you asked me, that's what she said. What do you mean? He said, that's what she said, I am the Immaculate Conception. Then he said, nobody can be the Immaculate Conception. Our Lady was born, that's not her name, like he said. And then he said to her, then he became not frightened, but he kept, my God, is that Our Lady kind of style. And he said to go away. And Bernadette thought she'd done something wrong. She went away, and it was at 5 o'clock in the morning, by the way, when she went.
5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. But it was only that night she found out it was Our Lady that appeared to her. Bernadette learned to read and write, as you know. She didn't know. That's examples of her reading. That's of her writing. That's the Catechism book.
This is an embroidery by Bernadette.
It's 700 kilometers from here. It took 3 days to get in those days. 3 days to get there.
And her shoes.
Letters that she wrote after. Remember,
We walked down the esplanade, back to the Rosary Basilica. On its facade are mosaics of the 5 luminous mysteries. The nave is circular and surmounted by a dome. Around the nave are 15 smaller side chapels, one for each mystery.
see it over there clearer.
Braille version.
The stone, the little mosaics. But these are the joyful mysteries.
We went up again to the second level, to the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. Above the entrance is a mosaic of Pope Pius IX, who defined the dogma of the Immaculate Conception in 1584, 4 years before the apparitions at Lourdes. Inside this structure is the Church of the Crypt, the first church built here in Masabielle. It is a place for quiet prayer and reflection. It contains a reliquary of Bernadette. However, she is not buried here, but in a convent in Yvers.
Follow me, because I'll just stay in the front and you'll see the whole thing.
Above the grotto.
That's the ground. And they're saying the rosary in French. That's live on television going out. There's the candle, and there's the baths down below. There's the stations, you can see them. The stations, the other stations, for instance, are up there behind. Just so that you know
After the tour, Father Brian bid us goodbye.
Okay.
We continued our tour of Lourdes by ourselves, following a blue line drawn in the streets, leading us to the Boli Mill, where Bernadette spent the first 10 years of her life. It was a happy time for Bernadette, before the mill failed and they became destitute. Some of us continued up the hill to an unused dungeon, unfit for prisoners, where Bernadette's family finally settled. It was late afternoon, and we went back to the sanctuary in time for the 5 p.m. procession of the sick. It ended in the underground Basilica of St. Pius X, where an adoration of the Blessed Sacrament was held. After the prayers, we went back to the hotel to wait for the Marian candlelight procession at 9 p.m. The procession was already starting when we got there. We looked for the Philippine flag and just fell in behind.
beten für die Kinder und für die Familien. Derde blijde mysterie, de geboorte van Jezus. Wij lezen in het evangelie volgens Lucas. De engel zei tot de herders: